Later this month, Donald Trump will hit a presidential milestone, the end of his first 100 days in office. One of the most eventful first 100 days in the modern era belongs to Ronald Reagan, whose presidency included a major development not just in the first days, but in the very first hours.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
It was the first inauguration. It was planned on the west side of Capitol Hill. All the rest had been on the east side. Reagan was a man from the west, from California, and he thought that the west held a lot of the magic of the American story.
Preserve, protect, and defend. Preserve, protect, and defend.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Now, congratulate you, sir.
What's interesting about Ronald Reagan's inauguration is that he really had a mandate. People were calling it the Reagan Revolution. I mean, he had painted the entire country Republican red.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
He was stating a very clear and different philosophy from the reigning philosophy, yet couching it in a way that made the people listening feel like he still had belief in the people of America, that even though liberals were upset by what he said, he reached out to the middle class. He reached out to people who wanted to believe in that sunny morning in America kind of spirit.
And we mapped out his plan for his first 100 days, and he blessed it during the transition. So he came shooting out of the box pretty fast. Everybody knew that he stood for cutting taxes, cutting spending, cutting regulations, building up defense, and balancing the budget. What he didn't have was the full confidence of the people that he could get it done, and he was going to be a strong president.
We will again be the exemplar of freedom and a beacon of hope for those who do not now have freedom.
What Reagan was trying to portray was the sense that America was going to take a more active role in the Cold War struggle. There had been a sense during the Carter administration that America had fallen behind and that our power had not been exercised, and especially because of the hostage crisis, and it looked like America was somewhat of a paralyzed giant abroad.
The Iranian hostages were held for about 444 days.
At this exact time of Reagan's inauguration, these hostages were released. What a gift to Ronald Reagan. He is able to have a major foreign policy accomplishment on hour one, not even day one of his administration.
The 52 American hostages are freed according to this flash.
I remember it was a very cloudy day at first, and the sun broke through at the very moment we learned about the hostages.
There was a lot of fear on the eve of Reagan's inaugural that Reagan might go to war in the Middle East over this. The patience had run out. The hourglass was empty.
There was a little ditty that went through the transition team before the inauguration. What is red, flat, and glows in the dark? The answer? Tehran, after Reagan becomes president. And that was a signal that had been sent during the transition. We want those people back, and we're willing to take action if you don't do it. And they did. They freed them.
Nobody still knows definitively why that exact moment the hostages got released. But it was Carter's people that were negotiating the last minute. All that December after he lost, Carter was working the circuit all day long to try to get them out.
It can't be an accident that the Iranian hostage crisis ended with the release of the hostages at the moment Reagan became president. Clearly the Iranians knew what was going on in the United States.
Whatever happened, the fact that it occurred and he was the president, he gets the benefit of that, seemed to symbolize, here's this new president, this hostage crisis is over, the paralysis of America will be undone, a new America is being born. It was an extraordinary way to begin his presidency, and it started it off on a very high note for him.
God bless you and thank you. Thank you very much.
Moments ago, there were shots fired just as President Reagan emerged from the Washington Hilton Hotel today after delivering a speech.
I looked back at the president, looked back at the crowd, and at that point, John Hinckley pushed himself forward and fired 6 rounds in about 1.4 seconds.
Shots fired. Shots fired.
The bullet came within an inch of his heart.
Was he going to survive? People remember John F. Kennedy's death.
There was this terrible sense of, I've been through this before.
There was great fear that Ronald Reagan had passed.
Just riveting stuff. Coming up in part 2, the nightmare scenario, an assassination attempt. That's right after this. We're looking at President Reagan's first 100 days. Right now, the assassination attempt.
Thank you very much.
We were going to the Washington Hilton Hotel where the president was going to give a speech. There was no unusual intelligence in regards to the president's security at that time.
March 30th was a turning point in the life of Ronald Reagan, but especially in the presidency of Ronald Reagan.
I was part of the presidential detail protecting President Reagan when he was at the Washington Hilton Hotel, and we were walking back to the armored car. I looked back at the president, looked back at the crowd, and at that point, John Hinckley pushed himself forward and fired 6 rounds in about 1.4 seconds. The 5th round ricocheted off the car and hit the president under the left armpit. 4 people were shot in the assassination attempt. Jim Brady was shot literally between the eyes. Tom Delahanty, a District of Columbia policeman, was hit in the back of the neck. I attempted to cover the president by making my body as large as I possibly could. I was shot in the right chest, but I clutched my abdomen because that's where the pain was. The president was shot under the left armpit.
His Secret Service guy threw him in the back of a car and jumped on top of him, and Reagan was in real pain. He thought what had happened was that Reagan had not been badly shot, but that in fact, when the Secret Service guy jumped on him, it cracked a rib.
Moments later, they saw that there was some frothy blood coming out of the president's mouth. With that, he redirected the motorcade to George Washington Hospital.
Many people thought Reagan was going to die.
There was this terrible sense of, I've been through this before. I was in college when JFK was assassinated, and the idea that in this country it was happening yet again.
When he got to the hospital, he believed so much in the dignity of office. He got out of the car, and first thing he did was he buttoned his coat and walked across the driveway. And when he was out of sight of the cameras, he collapsed.
It was that sense of, oh my God. The country's in peril. What's going on? Who's our leader?
And we decided the best place to be is down in the Situation Room. Information came in from the Defense Department, the Treasury Department, which has the Secret Service. The Vice President, George H.W. Bush, was on a flight to Texas, and we asked him to turn his plane around and come back.
There was kind of chaos throughout the administration and the land. Was he going to survive?
Secretary of State Al Haig, Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger began arguing about what DEFCON we should be on. We wanted to raise the DEFCON. Maybe the Russians are behind it. And Al Haig felt very strongly we should not raise the DEFCON because he thought it would send a signal to the world that we were, you know, that we were in crisis mode.
I had a team of reporters working for me on John Hinckley, and we investigated everything in Hinckley's life. His obsessive connection to the actress Jodie Foster.
He had an obsession with her. It was unclear in those early days why he had shot Reagan. He had no particular animus. He just seemed like he wanted to shoot somebody important in Washington. John Hinckley was a strange young man who was unbalanced, mentally unbalanced.
Was clearly established he acted alone.
The president was shot once in the left side. His condition is stable. A decision is now being made whether or not to operate to remove the bullet?
We weren't really sure he was going to make it until sort of late that night.
Where the president came very close to death because they couldn't find the bullet. It had flattened out in the shape of a dime and went between his ribs, and he was bleeding to death internally, and they couldn't find the round, where it was at, and what the damage was.
First of all, it was, is he going to live? And then once we thought he was going to live, what impact is it going to have upon him? I mean, this is a man of an age who got suffered a grievous wound, and so you really were concerned about, can he govern?
President Reagan is back at the White House tonight after spending 12 days in the hospital recuperating from a bullet wound.
I got a chance to be the editor of Ronald Reagan's diaries, and one of the first entries he wrote after that assassination attempt: "Whatever happens now, I owe my life to God and will try to serve Him in every way I can." He realized he was living on borrowed time.
It was best to keep him out of sight. He was a much weakened man. When he got out, he started a athletic regimen program. He put basically a gym up on the third floor of the White House where he could work out. He put 1 3/4 inches on his chest through workouts after he was shot.
There was still a question: was he a vigorous leader? Was he so gravely wounded that he was going to be incapacitated? And this was a concern. I mean, the whole world was watching.
But there had been no return of Ronald Reagan to full power. And so the issue became, well, how should he return? And the idea percolated up that this was actually an opportunity for him to reignite his presidency and get his economic plan through the Congress. So quite intentionally, he planned it out that the first time people would ever see him was in a joint session of Congress.
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
He goes to a joint session of Congress. Huge ovation, standing ovation for minutes and minutes and minutes, and then presents his plan again for what he wants the Congress to do.
I have come to speak to you tonight about our economic recovery program and why I believe it's essential that the Congress approve this package.
And at that point, the relationship between Reagan and the country has already been bonded, and the Democrats then, they have no choice, but the bill passes.
He soared up in approval ratings. Somebody that was, at best, half the country didn't like him in some ways. Suddenly you had about a 75% approval rating throughout the nation. The very fact that he survived, he became something larger than a president. He became a folk hero. And so he ends his 100 days really, oddly, kind of on top of the political world.
After that, he was back. He was really back.
It was not about politics or even about Reagan. It was about the presidency survives.
Just an incredible story. We'll be right back.